Wouldn't you like to know when the best times to make decisions were? When the stock market was going to go up? When people were going to fly off the handle? When prices were going to rise? And when prices are going to fall? Well, astrology helps with all this. And today in particular, we're going to be talking about solar cycles. Solar cycles are tracked by counting sunspots. In astrology, that is the glyph of the sun. Now, solar cycles last on average about 11 years. Sometimes solar cycles can go on for as long as 14 years and have been known to go as little as 9 years. Now, solar cycles consist of something called sunspots. Sunspots are cool planet-sized areas on the sun where intense magnetic loops jut through the sun's visible surface area, and these sunspots themselves give off solar flares. This basically just means that there's an increase in electrically charged molecules in the air or in the atmosphere of Earth. These negative ions, these electrically charged molecules, tend to have a positive effect on humans. Like every cycle, a solar cycle has its highs and has its lows. A solar cycle has a maximum where each day can have hundreds of sunspots. And also, during the minimum period of a solar cycle, it can have 0 spots for hundreds of days. Right now in 2020, we're in what scientists and researchers are calling a deep solar minimum, meaning there's very, very little activity on the sun. That's extending from 2019 and into 2020. There's actually been more spotless days, over 100 thus far in 2020 as of May, and there's, I think, over 130 plus now as of June 2020. When the sunspot cycle reaches a minimum or reaches a maximum, we tend to see extreme behavior in humans. Now, Dr. Tony Phillips states in an article on spaceweatherarchive.com that an international panel of experts forecasted the next solar cycle, and if they are correct, we will reach our solar minimum between July 2019 and September of 2020. We have not yet hit the solar minimum, and people only know when we've reached the minimum after 6 months have passed, and they look back and say that was the day with the least activity, and since then we've grown. Just recently, in May of 2020, Jamie Carter wrote an article for Forbes where he said the sun is asleep, that we're heading into a deep solar minimum with over 100 spotless days. During solar minimums and during solar maximums, we tend to see wars, we tend to see revolutions, we tend to see mass movements, a lot like we're seeing now as we approach probably the bottom of the solar cycle. The most minimum amount of sunspots with 0 for hundreds of days. So as we're heading to what is this deep solar minimum, we're finding out that there's extreme swings in behavior. Riots, coronaviruses, all sorts of crazy stuff politically going on. And that's going to affect business, the economy. This comes with major political and social changes at times like these, as you're seeing right now during this deep solar minimum. And these political and social changes have economic impacts. And if it wasn't for printing of trillions of dollars at this time, we would probably be seeing a rough recession, a depression, and we're only keeping this economy afloat, as we can see, with large amounts of quantitative easing, large amounts of stimulus due to the printing of money. So as an example of the correlation between rising and falling stock prices and the falling and rising of solar activity, you can see this graph here where the sunspots and the Dow Jones seem to be in sync with one another. Now, economists and astroeconomists alike who track patterns in the market have noticed the correlation between sunspots and the stock market. Now, Harry Dent, an economist and author, he is so convinced of the sunspot cycle that he was sure to put it in his book, The Sale of a Lifetime. He says in that book that 88% of stock market crashes happen in the down cycle of the sunspot cycle, meaning after we reach the solar maximum and then we head back down toward the bottom once again. During that fall in sunspot activity is when we see most 88% of stock market crashes happening. Hey, if we were to ignore it, we'd be ignoring it at our own peril. As you can see, there is a lot to be learned just by looking at the solar activity, at the sunspot cycle, and by looking at it, we get to glean when might be a good time to invest our money in a market that may rise, and when might be a good time to pull our money out because the market may crash. We've been able to denote, rather, that stock markets tend to fall when we're in a down cycle of the sunspot cycle. Just having that information alone, knowing that 88% of crashes happen in that period, is a great time to maybe pull your money out at that moment and then wait till the market reaches a bottom and then reinvest and ride the market back up. We have to pay attention to when the activity is increasing, when it's decreasing, and be sure to act accordingly and to be ready to act when these things are happening. You personally may have been born during a solar minimum, and the stock market tends to get more speculation when there's more solar activity during a solar maximum, which means that if you invest during a solar maximum but you were born during a solar minimum, you may not always make your best decisions. You may make your best decisions when the activity of the sun is at a minimum. And so that's why it's important to have your chart analyzed by an astrologer like myself, who can tell you when you were born, can look at this and see when might be the best time for you to make investments, when might be the best time for you to make moves in your business. Because sometimes it's more important that the decisions we make are made on a personal level. So that is how the solar cycle affects our businesses, affects the stock market, and that's just a glimpse into how astrology as a whole and the cycles of the planets as a whole affects business and finance in our lives.